Purim is almost upon us, and that means it's time for Megillah. So this week's shorashim are gimel-lamed-lamed and gimel-lamed-gimel-lamed. Shalom and welcome back to Hebrew Vocab Boost with Sup here. This week's shorashim are gimel-lamed-lamed and a four-letter root gimel-lamed-gimel-lamed. So there are quite a few different meanings associated with these shorashim. And while a couple seem completely coincidental, others, if you follow a path, you can see how they're related. So when I put this graphic here, all I'm going to say is that these paths are plausible, but they are not necessarily exactly how it happened. And I'm sure that there are scholars who would chart a different path for all of these meanings. So if you're an ancient Hebrew speaker and you see a mound and you call it gal, and then when you see waves in the sea, you might call them by the same name because they look similar. It's just that they're made of water rather than dirt. So that's how we get gal, meaning a mound, and also a wave. Mounds are often roundish, and so are other things, like a skull or a head, round tops to a square column, and yes, even the dung that you see on the ground. And you can even make an adjective that means rounded, as when you round the corners of a post or of something else that's squarish. Quickly back to dung. We often refer to things that we don't like as poopy. And what is something that the Lord really doesn't like? Idols and fetishes. And this is the one analysis that I did not actually do myself. I looked up the connection between the word for fetish and this shoresh because I actually thought it might just be a coincidence. But I found many, many sources that made this connection between dung and a fetish. Even calling them dung deities. And I even found one article that made a connection to the Egyptian dung beetle. Back to mounds and waves, we might associate a wave with what it looks like it's doing, and waves look like they're kind of rolling. So we get all kinds of verbs that have to do with rolling. And then going further, we get things that roll, such as plants that roll about in the wind, wheels, and yes, scrolls, which is the reason that I'm doing this shoresh this week, because of the scroll of Esther that we read at Purim. And what do scrolls roll around? A rod. So there's also words that mean something like a rod that have this shoresh. So these are most of the meanings in the Tanakh and the path that they might have taken to get there from a potential original meaning of mound or wave. But let's go now to the actual words. Before I get to all of these related meanings, I want to mention that there are a few meanings that seem to be coincidences. So let me know if you see or know of a relationship to the other meanings, the rolling or mounding meanings of these words. So for one, we have the word glila, which in the Tanakh meant a district or a region. And this meaning seems to have completely dropped out. And there are 3 instances in the Tanakh of the word gol being used to mean trust in the Lord. But this too has dropped out of use. And the preposition biglal, which means because of, was used in the Tanakh many, many times, and this one is still used very commonly today. Okay, back to the main group. So we have gal many times in the Tanakh, meaning heap, rubble, stone heap, or also meaning wave, always in the sense of waves in the ocean. In modern times, this word still exists and is very, very common in many, many forms. I hear it most often with the meaning of wave, but all of the dictionaries say it still could mean a heap. I guess I just don't talk about heaps all that much. Kalim.com says it can also be like a movement or a trend, like in art or fashion. And it can also be a shaft, like when we're talking about a mechanical shaft. And this is reminiscent of the rod of biblical times. And it can also be a wave, like a surge of something, as in gal hom, which is a heat wave. And I remember many times during COVID, I saw a lot of articles about a new gal corona, which was a new surge or a wave of COVID cases. And also a microgal is a microwave. And so we can lechamem et ha'ochel b'mikrogal, heat up the food in the microwave. And gali is an adjective that means wavy. Gulgolet in the Tanakh meant skull or head. And it wasn't generally used if I want to talk about my head, but it was used when counting people, saying that each person, each head deserved a specific amount of something. And this reminds me of when I was planning my wedding. The meals were always referred to as however many dollars per head, right? Per head meaning per person. And the same usage seemed to happen in the Tanakh. But it was also used to describe people's skulls. And in this sense, it is still in use today in modern Hebrew. So a gula in the Tanakh is a bowl or a globe that was never freestanding, but always on top of a lampstand or a pillar, kind of for ornamental purposes. And I don't see this in any of my modern dictionaries. Now, we have a singular word, galal, a plural, gilulim, and a plural construct, gelale. And in the JPS edition of my bilingual Tanakh, galal in the singular is always translated as dung. And there are two instances of the construct form, gelale, and it's always used in the phrase gelale ha'adam, and that means human excrement. And gilulim, the plain plural, is always translated as fetishes. So one question that arises is, are these different forms of the same word? Believe it or not, I've seen an article in the Biblical Archaeological Society that claims that gilulim is the plural of galal, which would mean that in the Tanakh, they were literally calling fetishes dung balls. But I have my doubts about this interpretation. Firstly, human excrement is the translation from gelale adam. And gelale is a plural construct form in this sentence. But when they write what is translated as fetishes of the house of Israel, they use another construct form. And they use gilule, Beit Yisrael. So it is possible that there are two different plural construct forms for one word. And again, I am no biblical scholar, but at least in modern Hebrew, that is pretty rare that you do have two different construct forms for a singular word. One of my etymological dictionaries and quite a few articles that I have found show that this could be related to dung. But there are others who claim that this is just a reference to how they were made by rolling up lumps of clay. And it could also just mean that they look like a pile of poop. I will let you decide. I don't see any words with this shoresh with any of these meanings, either poop or fetish in modern Hebrew. So it seems to have dropped out. As for the word glilim, there are really only 2 instances, and they are in the same verse in the Tanakh, and they mean rounded. And they are used in the word rounded planks, as in rounding the corners of a plank. Again, this is another word that I don't see anything like it in modern Hebrew. So, on the rolling side, we have a couple of verbs that we never see in the infinitive. And sometimes it's really difficult, at least from my perspective, to determine the binyan. So for the verbs, I'm first going to go through all of the verbs in the Tanakh, and then separately I'm going to go through the modern verbs. So in the Tanakh, we have a verb that often refers to rolling a stone, either off a well or back on the well or in front of the entrance to a cave, something like that. And so we have galelu and golel, which clearly look like a pa'al verb with the gimel-lamed-lamed shoresh. And then we also have an imperative golu and an imperfect, I think, vayagel, that also have to do with rolling stones. These verbs seem to be missing the second lamed. 2 other verbs that are missing the second lamed are galoti, meaning I have rolled something away, and vayiglom, which was translated as rolling it up, and the it was a mantle. And then we have one instance of what is clearly a PL verb with the gimel-lamed-gimel-lamed shoresh, gilgalticha, meaning I rolled you. And then there's also one instance of a hitpa'el verb with the gimel-lamed-gimel-lamed shoresh, lehitgalgel. It's found in Job 30, where Job is talking about people who are mocking him, and he says they are rolling in like a raging billows, and they use lehitgalgel for that. So, to the modern side, Pealim.com identifies verbs in 4 binyanim with the shoresh gimel-lamed-lamed, and 2 for the shoresh gimel-lamed-gimel-lamed. And there is one extra for each of them because Pealim doesn't really count the strictly passive binyanim, pu'al and huf'al, as separate binyanim. So since there is a pi'al verb for both of these shorashim, there is also going to be a pu'al. So liglol is a perfectly normal pa'al verb, meaning to roll or wrap something. And so it's a transitive verb, and that means that it has to have an object with it. You can't just roll, you're rolling thing. And the PL legolel means to unroll or unwrap a thing. So the opposite of the rolling. And we can see by the O in the infinitive that it is not going to be a typical PL verb. It does have that O sound and a vav after the gimel in every tense. Lehitkolel is an intransitive verb meaning to roll. So no, you can't be rolling a thing with this one, you're just rolling. And again, you hear that there's an O in the infinitive, which is not typical of hitpa'el verbs. So this one also has a vav sounding like O after the gimel in all of the forms. And so the nif'al verb does have regular forms with 2 lameds. So the infinitive would be lehitgalel. But Pealim lists the irregular form first, lehigol. And the fact that it's mentioned first suggests that it is the more common form. I can't recall ever seeing or hearing this one in the wild. So I recommend that if you want to use it, either use the regular forms or check out Pealim.com for those more common forms because they are truly odd. And so this verb is the passive of the pa'al, so it means to be rolled or to be wrapped. So on the gimel-lamed-gimel-lamed side, we have the PL verb legalgel, which means to roll a thing or to revolve. And this is a perfectly regular verb besides the fact that it has 4 root letters. And we also have lehitgalgel, which is an intransitive verb that means to roll. So no object with this one. And again, besides the 4 shoresh letters, it's a pretty regular verb. And I do have examples of this verb from my children's books. One is a translation of Shel Silverstein's The Missing Piece. And if you know this book, you know that the main character is a circle that spends the entire time rolling around looking for the piece that seems to be missing from it. It's not a full circle. It's almost like a Pac-Man. It's got a little slice missing. And almost every page has the verb lehitgalgel because this circle is constantly, that's the whole book, is the circle rolling along and then looking for the piece that fits into the space that's missing a piece in it. And I also have a children's book that was written in Hebrew, and in it, some of the characters are rolling on the floor with laughter, and they also use this verb lehitgalgel. So now, moving on to things that roll. In the Tanakh, we have 3 things that roll. We have tumbleweeds and thistledown. That's one thing. They're both plants that kind of get blown about in the wind. And we have scrolls and we have wheels. In the Tanakh, galgal refers to the plants, the tumbleweed and the thistledown that get rolled around by the wind. And it also refers to wheels or the entire wheel works of a wagon or whatever. This first meaning of the plants seems to have dropped out of use, but galgal still means wheel today. And we have a lot of modern inventions based on this use of galgal. We have a galgilon, which is a roller or a pulley. A galgalon is a cartwheel in gymnastics. So notice the difference. Galgilon, galgalon. The stress is on the last syllable, but I'm kind of emphasizing that middle syllable because it's the different vowel. We have galgale ezer, which means training wheels on a bicycle, and kise galgalim, which is a wheelchair, and galgaliot, which are roller skates. And so Megillah is the word for scroll in the Tanakh, and it still means scroll today. So it does mean any old scroll, but often, especially at Purim time, when we talk about reading the Megillah, we are specifically talking about the book of Esther, which we may or may not read in scroll form. And if we remember, Galil, with the plural glilim, meant rods in the Tanakh. And in modern times, it means a cylinder or a roll, like a roll of paper or a roll of fabric, something like that. And there are a couple of modern words that are not found anywhere in the Tanakh, of course, because they're modern inventions. One is maglul, which means a tape measure, because if you think about it, it gets all rolled up when you're not using it. And glula means a pill, like what you take with it, that's medicine. And I usually hear them say kadur, which means ball, when they're talking about a pill, but glula is also a perfectly good word. Okay, that's it for today. I feel like this was a really long one. There were so many words between these 2 shorashim. If you're not Jewish and have never heard a reading of the Megillah, I do recommend trying to find one and participate. It is a ton of fun. And if you are Jewish or you celebrate Purim, I wish you a Chag Sameach. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave it in the comments and I will do my best to respond. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe and press the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot papa ama ba'a. See you next time.